Liar. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Thursday, August 4th, 2022. You know, every day, every day when that announcement comes on and says, now here's David Waldman, and there's this short pause, and then every day that pause grows longer, it seems, in my mind, where I'm saying, now's the last chance to bail out. Should we not do a show? All right. No real reason not to, but it's just sort of like every second, every day, like, what if I just turned off the microphone and lay down and take a nap? What happens? Well, I mean, we'd get all sorts of panicked emails and texts and everything. We'd disappoint everybody. But hey, I don't know. Well, we're a disappointment to everybody every day. So what's the big deal, right? Why not? But when we have either Greg or Joan, or sometimes even Armando or some other guest lined up, I mean, that's the biggest reason, I think, to me. Well, what are they going to do? They're going to call and they're going to be all confused, and, we would all deal these things. It would be fine, right? We could do it. But, once you get started, it's just, you wonder at the end of the 2 hours when I'm trying to cram in the last part of a story, I don't have time to tell you all the things I need to say. And then I wonder, how could you sit there the second before the show's supposed to start and say, maybe we shouldn't do one? Every day at the end of the 2 hours, you can't believe how much you've tried to cram in there and how much there's still left to do. The idea of not, that's where the idea of not doing the show or, taking a day off. I can't take a day off. I'm supposed to tell everybody about the article I didn't get to yesterday. Or what if we miss news? Or what if somebody wants to say something and we don't get the opportunity to carry their message forward? Or Greg wants to call, or Armando wants to call. It's the pressure. I don't know. These are the things that go through your head just for a second, because once you get started, you can't imagine doing anything else for the rest of the day. So, okay, here we are. Many things to catch up on. Greg has plenty of them. He's already getting panicky about this. I'm being ghosted by Kagro X. I can't believe it. All right. Well, we're all set for today's show, except that I can't remember at all, what are we going to do and things like that. And then all of a sudden, new stories started coming across the screen, so I have a couple. I've already used 2 of my 10 free stories or whatever it is over at Talking Points Memo. So the month is already looking like the whole month is going to be a bust. Anyway, lots of other things I've put aside. There's more news about some of the things we've been talking about, things we need to get to. There's shocking, crazy news. There's, well, gee whiz, who could have predicted it news. I guess on the gee whiz, who could have predicted it, I'll just throw out a headline I saw passing by on the Washington Post. How does the whole headline read? They're quoting somebody here. Never seen it this bad. America faces catastrophic teacher shortage. It is, of course, back to school time. Everybody getting ready for that, except the people who used to be teachers, because now they're not. How could this have happened? Calling all teachers pedophiles, groomers, saying they also at the same time were expected to lay down their lives for their students, train with guns, be prepared for mass shooters that maybe the police may or may not respond to. Something. It's your fault if there is a shooting because you went out to your car to get your lunch. All of these things. I can imagine not being all that enthusiastic about coming back for another year. Maybe it's a little bit like starting the show. Right at the second before you're about to start, you think, what if I just didn't? What if all the stress and all of the things that bother me about it would to just disappear and not come back? Like me as a teacher, and I guess that must be what's going on. I can't believe that Republicans have managed to drive us to the point where they will be able to go out at campaign time and say American public education has failed and you need to turn to us for alternatives like privatizing everything and having all of your kids taught by robots like remember 2XL. You can all plug in a new cartridge to get your American civics instruction. All right. So, I don't know, dystopian nightmare that we're looking forward to among the many things I'm sure that we have in the Rafto Stories with Greg Dworkin, who is here waiting patiently. Good morning, Greg. How are you?
I'm fine. I called in early just to make sure you didn't go.
Yeah, right. Forget it. I quit. I'm leaving. But only for about 5 minutes before I realized, ooh, this story I just read is so cool. Let's get on the... Oh, I missed my chance. See, that's why what brings me on the air is the opportunity. What if a good story
What if I just want to do
in
this
5
one
minutes?
thing, okay, and then I'm done?
Yeah.
But
I mean,
I
we
can't
could.
tell you how many times I've come on the show thinking, okay, I got about 4 minutes worth of
Yeah.
material, and then about an hour later,
Right.
oh, I haven't even gotten to my second one yet.
Exactly. Oh, I got to go today early, but they can wait. And then, that's just kind of the way. But that's what makes it all interesting. If I
gotta
planned
get out
it,
early.
I'd
That's all
probably
right. The
take
judge and
days
the parole
off.
board can wait.
Yep. Okay. Well, what can't we wait for right now?
So I got 3 topics I wanted to talk about today, which I thought were of interest to me.
That's all
And
that
we'll
matters.
see if it's of interest to anybody else. I wanted to talk about Kansas and the Roe situation.
Roe.
Still
Roe.
have trouble calling it Dobbs.
Row your boat.
Because Roe won, after all.
Yes.
And then Peter Meyer
Colin
and the
Moore.
Democratic Dirty Tricks moral panic that people like Megan McArdle are having.
Oh, yeah. That's
and
not a thing.
Ron Fournier, which gives you an idea of whose side everybody's on. And then
that guy
Alex
disappeared.
Jones a little bit.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Right. He had a terrible day.
Right, you want dirty tricks. You're
Great.
talking about Alex Jones.
Yeah, right. Sure. A real dirty trick. Well, it
Real
wasn't
dirty
a
trick.
trick.
So
His
the
tricks
Alex
are
Jones trial, of course, is being followed very closely here in Newtown. And here's Ben Collins' story. After Alex Jones's lawyers accidentally leak years of emails.
Yeah, they did do that. This is them calling to get them back right now. All right, yeah.
InfoWars financial documents are revealed in court.
Aha. Everyone, you must have seen this by now, but I want to savor it. So, okay.
Well, that's the thing. It is worth saving. A lawyer for 2 parents suing Jones.
Yeah,
The emails show that InfoWars at one point in 2018 was making over $800,000 a day. And, of course, Jones claims he's
my
bankrupt and he doesn't have any money.
$800,000 a day. I can't even imagine.
Right? So lawyers for Alex Jones appear to have accidentally sent over the entire contents of the InfoWars founder's phone to the lawyers for the plaintiffs in his defamation suit, according to court proceedings Wednesday. Yeah. Mark Bankston, a lawyer for the parents of one of the children killed in the 2012 Sandy Hook Elementary School massacre, this is Jesse Lewis' parents,
Okay.
and who are now suing Jones, said during the proceedings that 12 days ago, his attorneys messed up and sent me a digital copy of every text and every email from Jones' phone for about 2 years.
Cool.
Now, again, I am not a lawyer. I don't play one on the internet, but apparently, for laymen like myself, the rules are,
Yes.
if you screw up like that, you have 10 days to undo your tweet.
Yeah, pretty much.
Then on the 11th day,
and you're notified too.
okay, it's mine.
Yes.
I own it, and you can't get it back, and too bad for you, I'm going to use it.
Right.
And so the lawyer said, so basically, as of 2 days ago, meaning 12 days ago he got the thing, 2 days ago I could start going through it. It's massive, but I found a bunch of texts which reference Sandy Hook. Now, you told me under oath that you didn't have any texts about Sandy Hook. You lied to me.
Under oath.
That's
What's
perjury.
oath?
Do you know what
oath.
perjury is, Mr. Jones?
Yes,
And Alex Jones
it's a
was
huge
sitting there
trick.
basically with his jaw dropped and then said, what is this, your Perry Mason moment?
Kinda.
Well, yeah.
I mean,
And so first of all, you lied to me about how much money you had. And secondly, you lied to me about Sandy Hook texts. And by the way, they said on a hot open mic later, I think maybe the authorities might be interested in these texts too. It goes back 2 years. We're talking about January 5th, 6th here. Of 2021 included. Maybe the January 6th committee would like to subpoena them. And in fact, the January 6th committee is very interested in them. I'm sure the Department of Justice is as well. So, good for Alex Jones. What comes around goes around. You want to talk about dirty tricks? We're talking about Alex Jones.
It was a terrible day for him. If there's any clarification needed, this does happen from time to time. Lawyers screw up and they send the wrong thing. And that's what that's the origin of the rule. And ethically speaking, the other attorney is to say, I can see that this is clearly a mistake, and you firewall yourself off the best you can from it. You're not supposed to look through the things, and you notify the other
it's like
party.
when Al Gore gets George W. Bush's debate prep.
Right, and
you don't look at it. You return.
Obligated to notify the other attorneys of what they did and how to, take it back. And so he did. He fulfilled that obligation. And what he said was that the Alex Jones's lawyers made no effort. They made no acknowledgement whatsoever of having done it, having been notified of having done it, and they made no effort to reclaim, which they would have been able to as privileged material.
Right. So I'm not a lawyer, but
they
you
let
read
it go.
that, and the first thing that goes through your mind is, okay, I'm his lawyer. Yeah. I hate him too.
I think so. Although apparently, in this trial, we've seen a couple of times that his lawyer is sometimes
screwed,
just as crazy as he is. Sometimes they are, and
but this is like treason. I want these texts to go to the Department of Justice.
This is the part that that's really new and exciting about it. This will sink his case, and that's great. But now realizing
he's already lost. This is just about the money,
right? But I mean, it'll sink his claims. This part about the money is him claiming not to have any, so please don't award it to the plaintiffs. And now they find out, he was lying, which is additional problems. But the juicier part is, of course, he was a big co-conspirator in January 6th. The one guy who didn't delete his texts from January 6th is Alex Jones, and apparently they're in the hands of a lawyer in the middle of suing him for doing some of the worst things ever done, let's say, via podcast.
So Dan Solomon is a reporter for Texas Monthly, this trial is taking place in Texas, so it's fair to call him a local reporter.
Oh.
And he is also following this, not just Ben Collins over at MSNBC and J.J. McNabb and some of the other people we follow for national coverage. So he says in court today for day one of the first of several damage trials in which a jury will determine how much money Alex Jones owes the Sandy Hook family for defamation and intentional infliction of emotional distress, which the court previously found he did commit.
Yes.
What's interesting is that the way this works in this trial is that the plaintiffs, that is to say the people saying that Jones owes us money, get to question everybody, the producers on the show, eventually Jones himself, and then the jury writes questions that they want the witnesses to answer, and then the judge goes through them with a big sombrero and his feet on the desk saying, I will allow it, I will not allow it, I will allow it, I will not allow it. And it's really odd because by looking at the questions, you get a sense of where at least some of the jury is coming from. You don't know which one asked which question.
Right.
But some of them are like, well, why isn't this just like Alex Jones' right to say whatever he wants? Why isn't this a First Amendment thing? I mean, that's not a relevant question. It's already been settled he's guilty.
Yeah.
You don't get to retry it here. But why you ask? So you get the sense that some on the jury, at least, are really inclined to let him go.
Yeah, well, like you said, it's too late for that. It's just
too late for that. But then you get I'm lying about how much money I got. I'm lying about whether or not I ever discussed them. I'm lying about whether or not I ever said it was a fraud and a fake and a hoax. And so even the people inclined to be on his side hear that he admits to the judge he's lying about all those things.
That's right.
And so, we'll see what happens.
Yeah, and I don't know what the threshold is and what they need for the jury. I don't think that they'll, in the penalty phase, I doubt that they'll require anonymity or unanimity for the imposition of any reparations. But I'm not certain. I don't practice in Texas. I don't know. I guess we could look it up. But
I don't know. So
there might be some people
here's
who are
what
holdouts.
Solomon writes. After a short break, we're back. This judge likes to give jurors a chance to ask written questions of witnesses, which is an interesting chance to get insight as to what they're thinking as the trial's ongoing.
Yeah.
Most of the questions are fairly thoughtful and curious. What, if anything, brings a grieving family the most solace? Do you know how the other families are dealing with this? Which is a good sign if you want thoughtful and curious people to be serving on a jury. So they asked, for example, how many stations, radio stations InfoWars is on, Okay, normal question in court happening now. Bankston, a lawyer for the Sandy Hook parents, why do you tell us who the Illuminati is?
Okay, please do.
I guess, you're getting into the conspiracy theory. And why is he asking that? This is why. Dan Solomon tweet. A theory that InfoWars was smitten with in 2012 is that The Dark Knight Rises had sneaky Sandy Hook references in it in order to torment viewers with the Illuminati's advanced knowledge that the massacre would be coming.
What?
That's the kind of stuff that Alex Jones pushes. And that's why it was so annoying when somebody tweeted this morning a video from Joe Rogan, which was from some years ago, saying, I don't know what the big deal is with Alex Jones, he's entertaining.
Maybe it's somewhat redeeming that it was from a couple of years ago. I don't care.
It doesn't matter.
Joe Rogan,
Alex Jones was trying to hurt people a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
There's nothing entertaining about that.
He may not.
You only do that when you have no moral compass whatsoever.
Yeah.
The only thing that matters is entertainment.
That's the truth of the matter is Alex Jones has always been like that. And
right.
Rogan
so is Joe Rogan, but the
know.
point is Alex Jones has always been like that.
Yeah. But Joe Rogan by then should have known. And even if he didn't, so what? Joe Rogan is a stone moron, and there's really no reason to be taking your cues about anything in life from that guy. But he's a caveman, and people like troglodyte stuff and whatever. So I don't know what the big deal is. Well, I didn't look either, and I don't care. So that's not a guy to take direct moral direction from. But also Alex Jones, who is terrible and sucks.
So Jones's lawyer, defense closing remarks. I forgot to mention, what about our electoral system?
Yeah.
Blames Hillary Clinton for the anguish suffered by the Sandy Hook parents.
Sure. Okay, so there you see that maybe it's not the lawyers necessarily doing a moral good turn by screwing up. It might just be they're crazy and they live in their own paranoid fantasy world and didn't know what was going on.
So the InfoWars witnesses have been arguing over and over again that the damage Jones did to them only began in 2017. And even if persuaded, the jurors may wonder why anguish they suffered in 2017 to 2018 doesn't count.
No.
Tells the jury they know Alex Jones never said no children died. I don't know how the jury could possibly know what Jones did and didn't say because they keep shifting what they claim they said.
That's true, too.
Very, very interesting.
Yeah, and the jury is entitled at that point to say, you know what, it doesn't even matter really for my decision what I can conclude definitively that person did or didn't say. That phase of the trial is over. This is a phase about, is this guy a giant a-hole and how much money should I take from him as a result? Easy. I can make that decision without knowing. I'm not sure if he said this one, but he definitely said that one, and even if he didn't, the fact that he changes his story all the time makes me want to take his money. So I'm doing
and then he just adds just for color, so you get to keep reading him. Fun fact, at the defense's first hearing on the case, the lawyer addressed the judge by beginning with, to quote Oscar Wilde, and then he closes with, first they came for, before wrapping up. So he's here to defend his client and try to convince the jury to only give the Platons $1, but watching the poem invoked on behalf of Alex Jones makes me want to scream.
Give him
Scrummet blood.
Yeah, right. Well, that's a little presumptuous. And good. Let him be raked over the coals. He's a giant jerk and deserves it.
Right. So, that's what we have to say about Alex Jones. The other thing that I thought was really interesting that I absolutely want to spend a little bit of time on is a little bit more about this issue, if you will. Megan McArdle raised it in a column. The Detroit News had it in a editorial, lauding Peter Meyer for his impeachment vote. And how could the Democrats stoop so low as to accurately portray Meyer's opponent as a radical who shouldn't be elected? Because everybody knows that means that Republicans will vote for him. So the actual best column I saw on this, of all places, was in the Bulwark by Jonathan V. Last, conservative, who absolutely skewers this whole way of thinking by including things that Meyer himself said. And as a reminder, our friend Marcy Wheeler, Empty Wheel, when we were talking about this online, said, look, don't forget, the only reason Meyer is in Congress at all is because he went after Justin Amash for impeachment. That's his district.
Oh.
So Amash had to leave. Meyer comes in winning because of impeachment. Now he goes out losing because of impeachment. So let's not get too hypocritical about all of this.
Yeah,
but
that's
back
a good
to what
point.
Last wrote. It's absolutely true, but back to what Last wrote. He has a column entitled, What Are You Doing to Protect Good Republicans from Their Voters?
Yeah.
Subheading, whose fault is it that Republican voters keep choosing illiberal conspiracy theories?
That's, theirs.
Right? So a few days ago, and this is behind a paywall, so I'm going to read you a little bit of it. It's short. A few days ago, Peter Meyer went crying to Barry Weiss's Substack about how terrible the mean Democrats are for running ads which accurately and negatively described his primary opponent, the conspiracy nut and MAGA standout John Gibbs. It was deeply unfair, Meyer wrote. You'd think the Democrats would look at Gibbs and see the embodiment of what they say they most fear. Instead, they're funding Gibbs. Over the past year, in private and in public, these Democratic colleagues praised the courage of Republicans like me. At the same time, some of my party, we were bad Republicans, not good Republicans, rhinos at best, traitors at worst, and after the impeachment vote, I was immediately censured by two county parties in my old district and my new district. The Republican Party of the largest county repudiated me. The Michigan GOP chair joked about my assassination. There's been too many online threats to count. And watching this unraveling, inside my party's become bewildering. The only thing that has been more nauseating, and this is what Last picks up on, listen to this line. The only things that's been more nauseating has been the capacity of my Democratic colleagues to sell out any pretense of principle for political expediency. And Last says, well, he's right. It's unfair, just like it's unfair that some people are born into $50 million trust funds. That would be Meyer, by the way. But I want to unpack Meyer's complaint and by extension the complaint of all the other anti-antis who are upset this morning about the choices Republican voters keep making. And let's start with the DCCC. They ran ads explaining to Michigan voters what sort of crazy person Meyer's opponent was. They were not positive ads. They were accurately described Gibbs' nuttiness, purely negative. But the DCC knew what they were doing. They were helping Gibbs by raising his name ID, by voters who want crazy. Now, these buys were maybe foolish, dishonorable, dangerous, but they're not the whole story. They're, in fact, only a very small part of the story. So, Peter Meyer voted to impeach Donald Trump when the evidence warranted impeachment. That's not nothing. In fact, it's really big something and good for him. On the other hand, Meyer has spent the last year plus running away from impeachment and just kind of hoping his voters would forget about it. He took no preemptive action to defend himself. He didn't aggressively defend himself. He didn't make his affirmative case for impeachment. He just went into turtle guard. And all the while, he kept blaming Democrats for the world's problems. So I want to highlight two passages from his little cri de coeur. Bear with me. Right. I was immediately censured by two county parties, and the Michigan GOP chair joked about my assassination. But the thing that's been most nauseating has been the capacity of my Democratic colleagues to sell out any pretense of principle. Now, hit pause here for a second.
All right.
Peter Meyer says the Democrats opportunistically running a negative ad that accurately described his opponent was more nauseating than members of his own party threatening him with violence and death. I'm sorry, but that's effed up.
I agree. That's backwards.
Right?
To say the least.
So Meyer and his apologists are insisting that his own voters lack agency, and they would have made the right choice if only Democrats hadn't told the voters who and what John Gibbs is.
Yeah.
Okay, and like I said up at the top, we're not children. But at the end of the day, the problem isn't that Democrats tricked Republican voters into choosing Gibbs. The problem is that Republican voters want Gibbs, and Peter Meyer can't bring himself to say that. And so what does he do? He blames Democrats. And then Last goes on to say, and here's the other problem. People like McCarthy and the Republican chair in the Michigan GOP, none of them are supporting him. They're not giving money to the campaign. They're not stumping for him. So here are the three takeaways from Peter Meyer and the good Republicans mourning his loss. Number one, Republican voters are who they are. There's no helping it. You can't expect them to choose wisely if they have full knowledge of the candidates. He's clearly saying this is who they want, so stop blaming Democrats. Number two, the Republican elite can't get their hands dirty defending good Republicans like Meyer because it might make them toxic, and you can't expect them to risk their own neck just to save a guy like Meyer, and therefore that's how come, I would add, you have people like from McConnell to McCarthy disappearing and pretending Meyer doesn't exist. Right? So Meyer's no Liz Cheney, but McCarthy's doing nothing to help him whatsoever. They're afraid of him. They're afraid of his voters. And so number three, and this is the important point here, instead, somehow it's the job of Democrats to protect good Republicans from Republican voters.
Nope.
nope is right.
Can't help
so
it.
That's the whole moral panic about all of this. How dare Democrats accurately portray somebody as an extremist? Don't you know Republican voters will want that? That's the Democrats' fault? No, that's the Republicans' fault.
Yeah, you should be dealing with that yourself.
You should be angry with them. What the hell are you talking about even?
Yeah.
So for those of you who have a moral compass and say, well, I don't know, it just doesn't feel right, I get that. I also get, as we've said on the show repeatedly, at least I have, that you want hardball, but you don't like hardball. It's still not the issue. The issue is Republican voters and Republican elites not wanting to do anything about it, finding a convenient way to blame Democrats, knowing Democrats will buy some of it.
Yeah, because they love to blame themselves for things or fight with other wings of their party. They want things to be right,
and so that means that if you see something that's slightly wrong, you should say, okay, that's slightly wrong. That's what real people do. That's what grown-ups do. That's what adults do. Yeah. And Republicans are they're rubbing their hands over it.
Yeah. It's an interesting
Mr. Burns.
thing. I guess
this is exactly what we wanted Democrats to do because we knew they would do it. They always do it.
Yeah, you can't stop these guys. I don't know.
I don't blame them for that, but I do blame them for even having the temerity to suggest that they themselves aren't to blame.
Yeah, I mean, there's no escaping that. And I mean, what kind of ads did Peter Meyer run about this guy? Did he say he was wonderful and he'd be a fine replacement, or did he say he was too extreme for the district?
Right.
Probably the same ads.
So this is how Last concludes. A year and a half ago, I wrote the central fact about institutional Republicans are terrified of their voters, which is why they blame Democrats for the choices of Republican voters.
That's the only way out.
Right, exactly.
All right. Well, yeah, I find the whole thing rather ridiculous. I understand the questions about it, but no, honestly, there's no one to blame for who gets nominated as a Republican but Republicans. That's why there are parties.
Why don't
primaries.
You denounce what the Democrats are doing? Buddy, you don't get to tell me and even ask me that.
Hi, it's me, David Waldman, the same guy who was just talking to you a second ago. Our Patreon subscription drive is still going strong, with over 175 monthly donors who help keep us on the air. If we've helped keep you going during the pandemic, why not return the favor and help us keep going so we can all be together for the next disaster? Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it easy to make secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for keeping you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We literally could not do this without you. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Guess what? There's more. I thought we would just leave at the break, but no, we stayed. There's more stories.
So, this is the Washington Post, August 3rd. Democrats face blowback after boosting far-right Michigan candidate. The party's congressional campaign arm spent $435,000 in a GOP primary to promote a candidate challenging Peter Meyer, who voted to impeach Trump. That candidate is also going to challenge the Democratic candidate Hillary Shelton. So that was money well spent because they defined him as who he is, and that makes it easier for them to beat him. And that's perfectly legitimate politics. And if you don't like it, you really shouldn't be commenting about politics.
There's a lot of that going around, though.
This is ridiculous. Democrats face blowback after boosting far-right Michigan candidate. What, they think they should spend that $435,000 challenging Mitch McConnell in Kentucky? That would be money better spent? What are they suggesting?
Not there. I don't know. I'm not certain what they think. I guess any money spent on, well, I don't know what. Now they have to review every Democratic ad that's produced, and if it doesn't carry the right message, something. The pundits get to say it was wasted money. I mean, I guess they get
right.
The right to do
they have a playbook that says this? Democrats this year have tried to interfere in multiple GOP primaries using ads that appear to be attacks on more extreme candidates as a way to subtly promote those contenders. Who says they're subtly promoting them?
What?
How about their ads that appear to be attacks on more extreme candidates because they're attacks on more extreme candidates? How about that? How about, I figure, given what the layout is like, that the extreme candidate is likely to win in a Republican primary because those voters are nuts, and so we'll start defining them early. How about that? Well, no, that doesn't fit my whole model here of what I'm trying to write about. So I'm going to do it in a completely different way and say that it's an underhanded trick rather than an out front identified ad by I did this. It's not like the Kansas situation where people were texting yes when they meant no, and not identifying who sent those texts. This was Democratic ads. They said so.
That's true, too. That's how you know who to blame, I guess, if you're going to make that story up. But, yeah, if you have a crazy candidate running and you say that guy is very Trumpy and we can't have him and he's too extreme for the district.
Here's the next one. Tuesday's vote was the first in which the closeness of the outcome, because it was a 4-point victory for Gibbs, suggested the Democrats' meddling may have tipped the results. That's bullshit.
Yes, I agree. All
okay?
Right, well.
Meyer voted to impeach, and the Republican voters wanted none of it.
Yeah, I mean...
That's why he lost.
I guess I would ask all the critics. Some of these critics have been writing for a year or more about how Meyer is in danger because of his vote. But, how brave it was to put himself in this much danger, et cetera, et cetera. And then the danger comes to fruition and he loses and they say, oh, it wasn't the danger that Republicans would reject him. It was the danger that Democrats would say that the other guy is worse, which really every crazy person knows will be understood as being better. And so therefore, that is a long walk, guys. It's like pretzel logic. I understand why you think you want to go there, but if you had any columns at all in the past year and a half about how Meyer was endangered by his vote and how brave it was, well, maybe it wasn't very brave at all. He had every chance in the world of winning, except Democrats will screw it up later by saying that the other guy running against him is so bad that, of course, you idiots will want him. I mean, if you had tried to make that argument a year and a half ago, after Meyer initially voted for impeachment, I don't know.
Laughed out of the room.
Right. But now it's like conventional wisdom, which is astonishing. So I'm with you on that one, and I will say the Arugo word about that as well.
Right. So if you're a Democrat and you have qualms about it because they found about 9 or 10 to quote by name in this article in the Washington Post, get over it and get over yourself.
Okay. You big jerks. All right.
Right. You big meanies.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm a little tired of that argument for sure. Not that you shouldn't have brought it up. I have no patience for the people continuing
go out
to
and
fight
work for
it out.
Hillary Shelton and get her elected because this guy's a nutcase.
Yeah. Right. And you know what you'll be doing when you're knocking on doors campaigning for the Democrat is you'll be telling everybody that the Republican in this race is crazy, and then all of a sudden that'll now be genius strategy for you.
Right. So now let's talk about some really dirty tricks. Let's go to Kansas and we'll look at what happened with that vote to maintain status quo.
Yes.
Voting against the status quo is like difficult. And so Republicans knew that, and so they tried to cheat in a number of ways legally. First of all, they put this ballot referendum in the middle of July in a sleepy primary where they figured more Republicans and conservatives would show up.
Yeah, that was weird.
And then they hired somebody to text false advice. Vote no means don't change the Constitution. But they texted information that said vote yes to preserve choice. Yeah. Which was the opposite of true. And, of course, they wouldn't identify who sent it and where it was from, but it's been linked to a Republican firm, so we know it was Republicans. So that's an actual dirty trick, not what happened with Peter Meyer, where openly Democrats said, the guy he's running against is a nutcase. You want to vote for him, that's on you.
But you knew that Republicans love nutcases. Well, yep. I do know that, but that's because you guys love nutcases. I'm sorry.
So this is the New Yorker, Peter Slavin writing. A win for abortion rights in Kansas. Voters went to the polls in historic numbers to reject Republicans' plans. The Dobbs decision in the anti-amendment campaign energized a raft of voters, especially women, across generations, particularly in cities and suburbs, who were determined not to allow Republican legislators and conservative churches to take away a right that had been in place for nearly 50 years. One pro-choice voter I met last month in Johnson County texted this morning, "Oh my God, thrilled, overjoyed." Opponents who have been fighting for decades against abortion, most notably during 1991 Summer of Mercy in Wichita, vowed to persevere. For now, though, the victors are savoring their triumph. I have 4 daughters, Ashley All, the spokesman for Kansans for Constitutional Freedom, told reporters on Wednesday morning this campaign was for them. You know, the thing that, again, you have to keep in mind is they knew that they couldn't put this on the ballot in a clear, straightforward fashion and win. They knew that. So they were trying to game out every possible way for their advantage, knowing it couldn't be just the straightforward, listen, this is what's going on, what do you think?
Yes.
And even when they tried to game it, they got clobbered.
All right.
Right? Carrie Elveld, writing for Daily Kos, notes, in 2 weeks, 538 goes from abortion vote in Kansas will be close to abortion could be a winning issue for Democrats. Okay. That's what winning does, I mean, I don't fault them for that,
No.
They only had one poll to go on, and that poll said it was going to be close. So that's what they wrote at the time.
I guess.
And then it was a landslide.
There being one poll, but yeah. Okay.
It was even bigger than Joe Courtney's first win for Congress, where he won by 100 votes. It was even bigger than that.
No.
Landslide Joe, no, this was a real landslide. And so this why abortion may be a winning issue for Democrats is in fact true. And it's being described as a political earthquake everywhere. And here's a piece in Vanity Fair by Abigail Tracy. The plan backfired. Kansas voters fiercely reject anti-abortion ballot initiative, a ballot measure that would have stripped abortion protections from the state's constitution resoundingly failed in Kansas Tuesday night. In a major victory for reproductive rights, it was a sign of just how unpopular overturning Roe v. Wade is nationally, one election watcher said. And so, again, what this drives home is, Dave Wasserman said this on election night, this is a sign of just how unpopular overturning Roe v. Wade is nationally. Mm-hmm. And in a very, very, straightforward way, this article just gets to the heart of why it was so dishonest. That the measure was on the primary ballot as opposed to the general election ballot was unusual. The conservative legislator wanted this to be among a small group of voters who generally lean conservative and have more competitive primaries in Kansas. But here we are, and people know what's on the ballot, and I think they know what's at stake, said Emily Wales, president and CEO of Planned Parenthood Great Plains. I think the plan backfired, and they ended up with a vote on abortion only weeks after the fall of Roe, and people understand this issue is really unique in this moment.
Yeah, I agree. That was a huge error. And thanks for highlighting that, the fact that it was the Republican legislature that made the choice of when
it's a Democrat's
to have
fault,
that vote.
Because look what they did with Peter Meyer. That's how come it's happening.
We gave them the chance to vote on this in July, and I didn't know that they were going to galvanize against it. Yeah, and
right. I mean, it's their fault because we put it on the ballot. We obviously had a plan to win, and they dagnabbit, they came and they showed up. How dare they?
That is an important point, though. I mean, I think everybody probably would have thought, oh, well, a question like that, clearly you're going to have that on a general election ballot, and it's amazing that it was allowed elsewhere. And it really shouldn't have been, but, you can do whatever you want when you have the gavel in the legislature, and that's when they decided to put it on the ballot. Although I have some questions about who pays for primary elections to be administered in Kansas, and I guess that makes a small difference in whether or not you should be allowed to piggyback a question like that in a
Well, don't forget, people who are not affiliated with a party get to vote.
Yeah.
Right? Well, I mean, if you're Republican, you can vote in the Republican primary, and if you're Democrat, you can vote in the Democratic primary, and if you're neither and you're an independent, you can't vote in either primary. Mm-hmm. So if that's taxpayer money, I guess you could argue they're being excluded, but that doesn't matter. You always have the chance to join a party. But independents could vote for the referendum, and that's how come there were more votes for the referendum than there were for the Democratic Republican choices there.
I'm sorry, it almost makes you surprised that the Republican legislature didn't think to pull the rug out from underneath independents and say, no, I know it seems crazy, but that's the law in this state. We hereby declare by
They might as well just legislate that only Republicans can vote on these referenda.
I guess that's probably the next step.
Why can't they just do that?
Got a bill for that. Because, logic, but how that works with them. forget it.
I mean, basically, that's how they think. And what they tried to do is only a very small step from that.
Yeah. Well, it's really remarkable and a part that shouldn't be overlooked. And
right, but you don't see these articles about how Republicans are always doing dirty tricks. No, it's always about the Democrats.
Right. You could be doing that. Everybody focusing on ads in Peter Meyer's race. And this was a statewide constitutional referendum. And it was still engineered by a Republican legislature. I mean, I guess everybody's looking at the fact that they lost. That's the bigger news, but they shouldn't lose focus on that. And there should be stories
on that
about
the day
how
after they lost. But today we're focusing on the fact that it was a dirty trick from the beginning.
There you go. We should be. Okay, good.
Right? And then here's an even bigger look. If that's 40,000 feet, this is 100,000 feet. A really interesting magazine piece, a political magazine. How Ruth Bader Ginsburg will have the last laugh on Sam Alito. The Dobbs decision is clearing the political ground for a resolution in favor of abortion rights. It goes on to make the argument that Alito thought that he was such a hot, potato. He's going to be the political icon of making abortion rights on clearly firm ground, just like what happened in Kansas. Just you wait.
All right. Could be. That would be.
Does Alito genuinely write his opinions with no concern at all of what the practical political consequences might be? Because he wrote that.
He might.
He wrote, in drafting Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health, and we know this from the draft because the draft was leaked by his people.
Right.
Right?
We think.
Well, somebody leaked it, and it was the right-leaning people that did so. Even if they could know,
most likely,
justices have no authority to let that knowledge influence our decision. Okay, so what does Alito think now? Well, they're not gotcha questions. Alito presumably would answer, that's what happened in Kansas, That's the kind of democratic process the Supreme Court short-circuited. But they also are questions that highlight how life is full of surprise and paradox, even for a Supreme Court justice who specializes in blustery self-assurance. Alito's career as an advocate for social conservatism began long before he joined the court. His record is replete with deference to religious tradition and skepticism of loosening sexual mores, including gay rights. His references to abortionists and Dobbs hardly conceal his personal disdain. There can be little doubt of how he would have cast his ballot if he were a Kansan. But the Kansas result raises an arresting possibility. Alito's long-term legacy may well be the justice who facilitated a national consensus on behalf of abortion rights. Unintentionally, today's hero of the pro-life movement could end up being a giant of the pro-choice movement. And his achievement was to take abortion out of the arena where it's been a half century, a hypothetical, and move it to an emphatically real-world arena. And in this new environment, all kinds of people who under ordinary circumstances would prefer not to have to think about it must decide what side they're on. Right? So there's a good reason to be wary of the old maxim of Fleet Street journalism, first simplify, then exaggerate. The impact of abortion politics is murky. In most cases, voters will be choosing among candidates, not referenda. But if the Kansas result isn't necessarily important to the politics of 2020, it's suggestive of the politics of 2030. Long-term, under current trends, it's easy to envision a decisive shift that would leave a national resolution of the issue in favor of abortion rights, even in states that don't currently support that. It's hard to envision the opposite results. Just look at Kansas. The difference, I added, that just look at Kansas. Difference lies in the gap between abstract politics and concrete politics. And maybe a different way to say this and look at it and think about it is support for Roe. Okay? There are people who are pro-choice. There are people who are, as they like to call it, for pro-life. We call it forced birth because you can see with cases like teenagers and rapes that that's exactly what it is. But the point is, however you fall on those issues, you could fall on either one and still support Roe. You could be the, obligatory Democratic Catholic office holder who says, personally, I may have issues with abortion, but from a politics and policy point of view, I support Roe because Roe is a compromise. Yes. Roe is abortion with limits. That's what most people in America want. And so when the forced birth side tries to exaggerate opposition to abortion by saying America wants limits, therefore we have to make sure that you can't get an abortion under any circumstances, that's a complete distortion of the first part of that comment.
Yes.
People are sort of queasy about abortion and would prefer to have some kind of limits, but at least have the opportunity under certain circumstances to have it done. That's what Roe is. And trying to overturn that overturned the compromise that people had felt comfortable living with for 50 years. Alito's an idiot.
Yes. Well, yeah, I doubt that he'll ever be viewed as any kind of even backhanded hero, but everyone will just laugh at him for, I think, eternity if this comes to pass. There's no room for him in the as a hero in all of this, but we'll certainly enjoy the fact that he screwed up. So, all right, no redeeming future for Alito on that one. That would be interesting.
No, it's just that caught my eye, and I thought that was a kind of good point. And then I guess the last thing we can talk about is this reconciliation bill that's making its way through Congress. It's interesting. Joe Lawrence, who writes for USA Today, was an editor, was columnist, was an editor, now it's a columnist again. The Democrats' New Deal could help save planet Earth in struggling West Virginia. What's interesting is her subheading here. I started my career in West Virginia covering floods, coal, and corporate exploitation. New investment and hope could bring change for the state and the planet. And basically, credits this deal, which Joe Manchin is a big part of in terms of how it actually helped West Virginia. And obviously, in the political world, what's happened is that at least for a week, Democrats have stopped, lacing into Joe Manchin and are getting ready to lace into Kyrsten Sinema. Because she's the next holdup. Bernie Sanders has a lot of bad things to say about this. There's good things, there's bad things. I'm not worried about Bernie's vote. I'm actually not that worried about Sinema's vote. I think she'll get her pound of flesh. She'll demand that corporate taxes get eased up in some fashion because she's paid for by corporate America and has no compunction whatsoever about doing this, but not her fault. If 50-50 Senate sets it up so that any given senator on any given day, be it Bernie Sanders or Rand Paul or Joe Manchin or Kyrsten Sinema, can hold up everything because that's just the way it works. And I think in the end, the Democratic caucus will come together and they'll do what they need to do, and something good will pass, because even if she strips out some of those tax things, it's still a terrific environmental bill. Yeah. So Lawrence is right about its effect on West Virginia, for example. So, you can be mad at her, but in the end, it is what it is.
Okay, just so long as there's room to be mad at her, because I feel like we're going to have to do that.
The thing is, she's being totally exposed as, I'm in it for the money.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Right, these are the people that fund my campaign, and so I'm going to do what I can to make sure they get the best possible breaks. Not because I think it's good for the country, but because I think it's good for my political backers. It's just so clear and obvious and apparent. You can't run from that now.
Well, okay. You're going to have to run on it now, I guess. Yeah. So good luck. It was your idea. Maybe it'll work.
Now, here's Paul Waldman. Republicans are in a panic over Democratic tax proposals. Guess why?
Why?
Well, the Inflation Reduction Act that Democrats are working to pass through Congress is only incidentally about inflation. Mostly it's a bill addressing climate change and prescription drug prices, with a hodgepodge of provisions on other issues, but it takes a few steps toward making our tax system a little more fair. And naturally, Republicans are outraged at that. Their tax hikes would shatter President Biden's promise not to impact households earning below $400,000. It's a new tax on American jobs, and you'll be shocked to learn that the GOP's passion for the economic interests of regular folks is less than sincere, and their description of this bill is not quite accurate.
Well, okay. It's not.
Only a bill aimed at the bank accounts of the wealthy and corporations could produce this kind of angry Republican opposition, and that's exactly what's happening here. There's 3 key tax provisions. The first narrows carried interest loophole, which enables hedge fund managers to pay the lower capital gains tax rate on the money they make rather than their ordinary income. No plausible way for any lawmaker to defend this other than saying, I enjoy collecting large checks from hedge fund managers at their palatial Hamptons estates, which nobody would say out loud. So instead, they focus on the other 2 main proposals, the attempt to address the fact that corporations find so many ways to avoid paying taxes, even when they're making huge profits. Mm-hmm. And so that's really the deal here. Anybody who wants to say corporations are people and should never pay any taxes at all is free to make these arguments, but transmuting a corporate tax increase into a direct tax increase on the middle class is profoundly misleading. JCT, that's the Joint Commission on Taxation.
Committee.
Analysis doesn't take into account many of the bill's provisions. It will give financial benefits to the middle class. And that brings us to the last major provision, a significant boost of funding for the IRS. Mm-hmm. As a ProPublica investigation found, the campaign to slash the agency's budget has left it understaffed, hamstrung, and operating with archaic equipment. The result, billions less to fund the government. For all intents and purposes, the GOP's motto on taxes is defund the police. Mm-hmm. And Democrats have wanted to do something. Here's their opportunity. And here's an important lesson. When conservatives warn that some new proposal will hurt the middle class, take a closer look to see who will really be affected. It's almost always the rich and the corporations. The angrier they get, the more likely it is that the bill in question is on the right track.
All right.
And that's me for today.
Okay, well, we can take that and run with it. I have seen a couple other thoughts about it, and people interested in squeezing certain other extraneous material into the reconciliation bill in the hopes that it will carry it over the threshold and pass. But yeah, it has happened in the past, but keep in mind that it is a reconciliation bill, and
parliamentarian has a close eye on it.
Yeah, they have, and strange things happen, and sometimes things that are quite obviously, or that seem quite obviously budgetary in nature, turn out to be to get a ruling against them, and that does happen from time to time. All right, well, I guess must have been something going on in the background there at the satellite office in Connecticut. So thanks to Greg for carrying us through most of this first hour, and I appreciate it as always. We'll catch up with him again next on Monday. So you have a long weekend, everybody, to screw everything up and do terrible things so that we can report on it when we speak to him again after the weekend. Specifically, though, as I was aiming at here, I saw, caught wind of discussion this morning about one of the extraneous items that people might be interested in trying to shoehorn into the reconciliation bill, and unlikely to work, but we get this from time to time. And let's see, I think I saw Armando, I guess, got roped into the conversation about it this morning and was saying, yeah, unlikely to actually work. And again, I guess it deserves a little bit of attention because it could use some clarification. We very frequently find ourselves asked to do this and find Democrats pressured to do this. This is specifically, I don't even know if I'll be able to come up with the mention from earlier. Let me see if there's any way I can scroll back and find this. But as I recall, the question was, couldn't we try and shoehorn into the bill some sort of codification of the Roe standard with respect to abortion? And there are a number of issues with that, some mechanical, some procedural, some substantive, which make it extremely unlikely. I guess it comes from the suggestion of 50 Shades of Way. You might find them on him on Twitter. It's Dave New World 2, I guess is my best parsing of the all one word actual handle. But Dave New World _2, who identifies more readily as 50 Shades of Way on Twitter, saying this, putting this out there, and this happens from time to time. I think it's you get a certain amount of understanding of when the rules can be bent and broken and how, and you tend to overestimate the willingness of senators to use that tool, and you get a conclusion like this one. Lisa Murkowski and Susan Collins have joined Kirsten Sinema and Tim Kaine for a bipartisan bill to codify Roe versus Wade, which means, and this is where things start taking logical leaps, which means that the Senate has at least 51 votes to add abortion rights to any budget reconciliation bill, as long as Chuck Schumer and Kamala Harris want to. Okay, you see the logical leaps and all that. It goes on in this thread to then claim securing the right to reproductive freedom for half of the country has a significantly positive impact on the national budget. And we can pass multiple reconciliation bills a year. There's no reason why Democrats can't pull this off when they have 51 votes. Let's see, there's actually more in this thread here. The Senate parliamentarian is an unelected official who gets paid $172,500 a year. Has nothing to do with it, the amount of money, but it's nice to know. To decide what we can pass via budget reconciliation, but they have no authority over Chuck Schumer and Kamala Harris and can be ignored at any time. So yes, we can pass abortion rights with 51 votes. And there's a bunch of screen caps of people. This is his answer to all the people who have said, yeah, but I don't know if you would be able to get including the abortion issue in a reconciliation bill because parliamentarian. And the objection to those objections, or the answer to those objections is, well, you can ignore the parliamentarian. Okay. Well, as you know, you can ignore the parliamentarian, but I guess I'll take it apart sort of piece by piece. The various places in which I grimaced on this will tell you where the weak points are. Starting again from the beginning. Lisa Murkowski and Susan Collins, okay, we know who they are and what they're likely to do, have joined Kirsten Sinema and Tim Kaine for a bipartisan bill to codify Roe versus Wade. So the point one here as we approach the break is Collins and Murkowski, for the purposes of a standalone bill that would codify Roe versus Wade, if that's even something you can do, that's a substantive issue with the bill. They are willing to go along with a standalone bill that would codify Roe versus Wade. And you cannot conclude logically or any other way from that means that the Senate has at least 51 votes to add abortion rights to any budget reconciliation bill. It means nothing of the sort. It means that logically speaking, there are 51 votes out there for the notion generally of codifying Roe versus Wade, whatever that might mean. But to say that those votes mean that they would do so on a reconciliation bill, there's no evidence of that. Welcome back now to the show, and a little bit late, so I won't bother telling you what show you're being welcomed back to in order to save that time. What do you think of that? Okay, so where we left off in this discussion here was, this is quite a common ask. Why not try and pass it via budget reconciliation? And, aside from the first line answer of, the Senate parliamentarian won't allow it, and I know that the pushback is, well, you can ignore the parliamentarian. Well, you can ignore the parliamentarian if you have a majority prepared to do so. And the fact that there are allegedly 51 votes in the Senate who have said tentatively that without seeing finalized text and knowing the political landscape that will be in place at the time any vote is called, you have 51 votes for the general concept of codifying Roe. But when the question is, will you codify Roe via reconciliation, there's an additional excuse there for several votes to fall away. Not least of which, of course, would be Murkowski's and Collins's. So right away, you're back down to 49 votes because they're not likely to join an effort to do it via reconciliation. And in fact, there are probably other votes that would fall away there too, probably from the Democratic side. So it's just wrong to say that the fact that there are 51 people in the Senate who would vote to codify Roe in a standalone bill means the same thing as there being 51 votes to codify Roe via reconciliation. So it's not up to Chuck Schumer and Kamala Harris. It's up to the people who hold those votes. And the fact that in your mind it makes no logical sense to be in favor of codifying Roe via one procedure but not via another procedure doesn't help if they withhold their votes. Those votes belong to Murkowski and to Collins. And if you say, but that doesn't make any sense, but they say, yes, but you're not getting my vote, you lose. That's the end of the story. If you don't get the vote, none of it matters. But it's not logical. It's logically inconsistent. You'll look like a fool. Maybe, probably not really, but maybe, if you don't get the votes, what are you going to do? Well, they look like fools. Yeah, they do. But what happened to those votes? You didn't get them. So they're not the only one that looks like a fool. You know, if you promised that they would be there and they don't show, you're not going to look great. But maybe you're okay with that. That's okay too. It goes on, like I said, to say, well, they can add this to a reconciliation bill as long as Chuck Schumer and Kamala Harris want to. And that too, not actually the case. Schumer might decide to bring the bill that way to the floor. Kamala Harris might decide to say, all right, well, I will ignore the advice of the parliamentarian. But if the votes fall away, then you're really in trouble, because once the vote is taken to overturn the ruling of the chair, you might find yourself without the necessary support. You might not, but you might. It goes on to say here, as we read earlier, securing the right to reproductive freedom for half the country has a significantly positive impact on the national budget, and we can pass multiple reconciliation bills a year. All right, first part of that one. It's probably true that you can construct such an argument, but is it the sort of argument that the parliamentarian will listen to? They are very strict about insisting that the budgetary impact not just be incidental and that it be very direct, that it be a dollar and cents amount. So again, while it makes some logical sense to some of us to say, well, if you don't secure abortion rights, then that makes it very difficult for women, or impossible for women, to plan their economic futures, and the right to control reproductive decisions of when to start a family, when not to, when to, and the timing of that with your career considerations, et cetera, et cetera. There are very definitely economic impacts, but there aren't budgetary impacts. That's where it becomes a problem. And it's not the same thing to say that I confuse economics with the budget is not an excuse to say, yeah, well, there's a dollar and cents number that I can put in the budget document about the impact of abortion. And there's no confusion here. I mean, it's not the case that 50 Shades here has confused necessarily the budget and the economy. But yeah, it's more than just saying that there's an economic impact and then just saying, well, that therefore means a budget impact. You really have to demonstrate that. You can't just say, well, economics will be affected, and so therefore people would say earn more money and pay more in taxes, and so therefore there's a budgetary impact. That's never worked with the parliamentarian, and it's not likely to work now. But again, you're saying you could override the parliamentarian. Well, you might if you could get those votes to stick with you. First of all, they'll probably jump ship purely on procedural grounds. But if they don't, and you say, well, what I really want is for you to overrule the parliamentarian, not because you want to do this procedurally and she won't let you, but because she has made the wrong call on whether or not there's a budget impact. Well, then you're going to have to show some numbers, some budget numbers, and it can't be. I mean, for people for whom these issues are real and make sense, and they really think that there should only be budgetary impact in a reconciliation bill, saying that, well, probably a bunch of women will earn more money and therefore pay more taxes, and therefore that changes the budget, is not going to cut it. You'll have to convince more than the parliamentarian, and if you think you'll just overrule the parliamentarian, there's two ways to convince people to do that. One is just be logically consistent, and that's never worked. The other is to say she's just making the wrong call on budget impact, and it's unlikely that they would agree that that's the case. Then, of course, the question of, can we pass multiple reconciliation bills in a year? Yes and no. We've been over this ground a number of times, but I do note for the record that in some of the pushback to this thread, people say, well, really, it's not that you can do multiple reconciliation bills in a year, but it's that you could do a second one, but it's a maximum of 2, which is also not actually truly the case. But I can see how you could land on that conclusion, given the history of how we've handled reconciliation bills in the Congress in the past couple decades. But it's still not truly correct to say that. But it does represent a great step forward, because for many years, even recently, people have said that, oh no, everyone knows, just as everyone knows it takes 60 votes to get anything done in the Senate, and you can't change Senate rules. They used to say, can't change the filibuster rules by simple majority. Yes, you can. Oh, no, you don't understand. Pat, pat, pat on the head. That's just not the way it really works. And then we showed that was the way it really worked, and now everybody says, okay, well, it's the way it works, but, you're still not going to get to this many votes on it. And that may be true. But it was a big leap forward to get columnists and reporters and pundits and senators themselves and staffers and lobbyists and everyone to recognize that it really was truly the case, that the way we said it worked is actually the way it works. And here it's not that dissimilar. It used to be, though, I guess the point of this part of it is, it used to be that all of that same lineup of knowledgeable people, savvy people, used to say you can only pass one. Everyone knows you can only use reconciliation once a year. And then we demonstrated you can actually use it multiple times a year under several different circumstances. And was originally designed to be used several times a year, but for a different reason than you're thinking. But even so, you can use it multiple times a year. So I credit it as a step forward that there are people who object to the proposition that you can use it multiple times a year, saying as a backup, well, you can only use it twice a year, because they used to think you could only use it once a year. So there's progress there. By the way, can you use reconciliation more times than that? Yes, you can. The reason that we've come to the conclusion that you can't is that Congress has been in the habit, for various reasons, of passing one single omnibus reconciliation bill a year in any, and they don't pass them each year either, but when they do use reconciliation, they tend to do so by passing an omnibus bill, and that's because passing a reconciliation bill is quite a pain in the butt, and you only really want to deal with it once if you have to deal with it at all. So they smash all reconciliation measures together so that you can do it with one vote and one attending voterama along with it. Because anytime you have any of these filibuster-proof bills having to do with the budget that are protected from the filibuster because there's time-limited debate, that time limit always leads to a free-for-all voterama, and sometimes better, sometimes worse, but it always presents that possibility, and people want to avoid that. So I guess I'll bring you back to the original roots of reconciliation, that there were, how many? 3, maybe 4? I think bedrock, we say 3 different statutorily enumerated uses for reconciliation. I don't even remember if I can put my finger on all of them, but the one that everybody forgets about from time to time is that you can use reconciliation to increase the debt ceiling, because that's an enormously unpopular thing to do and is political dynamite, and so they thought that it might be necessary anyway from time to time, so they protected it from demagoguery by allowing it under reconciliation. But the 3 or 4 or however many different reconciliation uses that are out there create different opportunities. Plus, of course, sometimes when you get reconciliation instructions in your budget, it says, that they will assign various different committees, appropriations committees, to find additional savings. And so, not appropriations committees even, but authorizing committees actually will be instructed to find cuts and then report them back to the budget committee for the purpose of smashing them together into one omnibus bill. But it is not required that the budget committee amalgamate all of, is that a correct usage? That they not smash into one omnibus bill all of the various cost savings proposals made by the varying committees that were charged with reconciliation instructions. They could report them all straight out individually and bring them directly to the floor that way. And so that when the finance committee recommends these tax provisions under reconciliation and the HELP committee, as they like, the Health, Education, and Labor, right, and Pensions Committee, HELP, could recommend various other adjustments to the budget under reconciliation. And instead of smashing them into one omnibus bill, you could bring 2, bring 3, bring 5, however many committees are reporting you bills under reconciliation instructions, and just send them directly to the floor. You wouldn't want to do that because each one of them would be subject to the same time-wasting, annoying, and also demagoguery-filled voteramas, so they want to avoid that. But you could that's an easy way to explain and understand how you could have as many reconciliation bills as there are instructions in the budget. So just on its face, it's just flat wrong to say something like you can only do reconciliation once. That's not at all true. But if you smash them all together into one omnibus bill and therefore meet the obligations of your budget instructions, or rather, I guess, take advantage of the opportunity given to you by reconciliation instructions in the budget bill. If there are instructions to 5 committees, that gives you the opportunity to do 5 of those bills. And then, arguably, there's the question of whether or not you can revisit those instructions if you revise the budget mid-year. And does that create another opportunity for another 5 reconciliation bills? Now, each of those reconciliation bills, even if you just do the 5, should, by the parliamentarians' reckoning, only contain not only provisions with direct budgetary impact, but they probably will start demanding that they have direct budgetary impact on the same budget function that you're tinkering with in this bill. That is, that if it's a reconciliation bill reported from the Finance Committee, then all changes, all extraneous material or all additional material ought not only to have a direct budgetary impact, but that it ought to fall under the jurisdiction of the Finance Committee as well. So you'll probably get an even more narrow and exacting bird bath for each one of those 5 reconciliation bills, which is even more of a reason to try to avoid doing things that way. But I want to explain that it is a mistake and an accident of history that people have come away with the impression that there's a limitation of it either being 1 or 2 reconciliation bills allowed per year. It's as many as it takes so that you meet the you can't do more bills than there are instructions for reconciliation in the budget. But since that involves multiple committees and doesn't require that you smash them all into one bill, that's the number. And that's extremely hard. That's no kind of rule to give people. How many reconciliation bills can you do in a year? I mean, I guess you could shorthand it by saying however many committees there are instructed in the budget resolution to undertake reconciliation work. But not only will people not understand that, it's not a very satisfying answer. One, though, is the kind of thing that people can carry away and pretend is a rule. Why is it one? I don't know. I guess because there's always been one done, and every time that they've tried to do a second one, they haven't been able to. But that's because they used up all the reconciliation instructions in one omnibus bill, not because there's a rule that says only one is allowed per year. Is that clear? Does that make any sense to people? I mean, I hope so. And it's very rarely going to serve you at all to know that, because in practical use, it's always going to be one or sometimes two if the circumstances warrant it, because of everyone's preference for using omnibus bills. But try explaining that, in an elevator. You get thrown down the elevator shaft. Anyway, so there was more to this very short thread from 50 Shades of Way saying, for instance, where were we? Right. You can pass multiple reconciliation bills a year. There's no reason why Democrats can't pull this off when they have 51 votes. That part, I guess, I can't object to. There's no reason they can't pull it off when they have 51 votes, but they don't have 51 votes. Yes, they do, because Collins and Murkowski said they supported the idea of codifying Roe versus Wade. Yes, they did. They said they would support a standalone bill that would codify Roe versus Wade. They did not agree, though logically they should, if they're consistent on this one substantive issue, and that they can't be swayed by procedural considerations. But we know they can be persuaded by procedural considerations. It happens all the time. And even if they don't blame it on that, they could just blame it on other political circumstances. The timing is not right. You just did something that insulted us or insulted Republicans, and so therefore we're going to be petulant about it. We just saw that happen on the PACT Act, things that Republicans had agreed to previously that didn't change in the second go-round of drafting on the PACT Act, but yet they did cast votes that said no. Sure, they were able to turn that around in a couple of days by pressing them on the logic of it, but they didn't have to give way on that. They certainly could have continued to be petulant, and if the circumstances are right, they would continue to be petulant. Democrats don't have 51 votes on anything. There aren't 51 Democrats to begin with in the Senate, and you almost never have any senator's vote on anything. They can always withhold it, and procedural chicanery, if that's what it is, will cost you those votes for sure. So, yeah, it's a difficult thing to say. And then, on to the third of these tweets. The Senate parliamentarian is an unelected official, that is true, who gets paid $172,500 a year, and that's supposed to make you resent them, but it doesn't really have anything to do with anything, to decide what we can pass via budget reconciliation. They do a lot more than that, of course, but that is when they enter the spotlight most prominently each year. But they have no authority over Chuck Schumer or Kamala Harris. Yes, to some extent, except their opinion is highly valued there. So there is that. And this person, the parliamentarian, can be ignored anytime. So yes, we can pass abortion rights with 51 votes. But you don't have them. You could, if you had them, you could do it if everybody agreed that they wanted to do things that way. But it's unlikely that they'll all agree that that's the way they want to approach it. So there's no such thing as having 51 votes unless you really have 51 votes. Do I have 51 people who would like to codify Roe v. Wade? If you believe them, yes. Do I have the votes of 51 people to do it by this process? No, I don't. Should I? Should they ignore the process and focus only on the substance? You might ask them to do that. But until they say, yes, I will do that thing, you don't have 51 votes, and you should never count on it because I've seen it a million times. They run away from that all the time. I mean, it's Murkowski and Collins you're talking about. We've all seen them run away from things like that. And this is probably a better reason to run away than the reasons they've used to run away in the past. So don't get too excited about it. And if to the extent that you're then going to use that imaginary having of 51 votes for this very particular procedural maneuver, and then use that and say, see, because they wouldn't do that, that means Chuck Schumer and Kamala Harris aren't really on our side. They don't really want to codify Roe versus Wade, which would be a perverse conclusion to reach if you're also going to say, this whole thing hinges on my belief that Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski really and truly want to codify Roe v. Wade, but Chuck Schumer and Kamala Harris don't. They do. They may all want to do that. And Chuck Schumer and Kamala Harris are far more likely to want or to agree to say, I'd love to be able to, if we could, pass this by reconciliation than Collins and Murkowski are. They will resist that for a long time. But, I guess if you say, Chuck, I'm going to require that you poll the entire Democratic caucus and Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski on this. Ask them, if I were to bring this, to engineer this vote such that you would be asked, will you vote to overrule the parliamentarian and include the codification of Roe versus Wade in reconciliation? Would you do it? Can I have your vote for that? If they're telling Schumer no, the answer to that is no, and then Chuck Schumer concludes from that, well, then I won't bring it because it will just end in defeat and I will end up looking like an idiot. Is that the same thing, really, as Chuck Schumer really, truly, in his heart of hearts, being against codifying Roe versus Wade? No, not if he doesn't have the assurance that the votes will be there. No. So then others might argue, well, isn't it worth doing it to illustrate that the votes of Lisa Murkowski and Susan Collins are perhaps less reliable on the substance than we thought? And who cares if they're going to make the excuse that the procedure is what's bothering them? They're going to look like hypocrites to most people. And so therefore it's worth bringing the vote. Is it? Well, closer call. I suppose you could debate about that, whether or not the majority of voters would recognize what was going on and reach the conclusion that Democrats in general are in fact in favor of codifying Roe versus Wade, and you should stop thinking of Murkowski and Collins as being in favor of that. I don't know that that's an accurate reflection of where they are. To the extent that that's a worry for you, then I would recommend against it. But, you could try it, and then you could say, well, look, Murkowski and Collins might be nominally in favor of this on the substance, but they become weak-kneed when it requires procedural hardball. And we need people who are going to replace them, who are willing to do the procedural hardball to make this happen. It's a long walk there, but in the end, it won't have delivered the goods, and so you're just going to get more of the same. More people who are ostensibly Democratic leading in their voting saying, I hate that the Democratic Party is so ineffective and weak when it comes to defending our most cherished policy positions and our basic rights. Well, yeah, but we got tripped up by Republicans not joining us for that. But you still insist that it's my fault for not asking them to come to a fight on our side when we know that they're going to bail out in the end. And I don't really want to have that happen and show everybody that that will happen. And so perhaps you'll pardon me for not bringing a losing proposition to the floor. But apparently not. So anyway, I don't know. I find that kind of nuance interesting and worth discussing because these things come up over and over again, and they're being it happens all the time, and it always gets portrayed this way, and it's weird and counterproductive and strange. I wish there really was a way, though, to have those test votes without jeopardizing so much. All right, let's see. Last thing I'll try and cram in before this break. I saw a very dismaying set of tweets, and I probably, you know what, now that I'm thinking about it, I can't probably fit it in. Well, maybe if we just really hurry, but I'll have to credit it afterwards. But somebody showing us this morning that the results from Kansas apparently have been lost on Dianne Feinstein, which is, we're bringing up that same issue again, because everything is now getting lost on Dianne Feinstein. She was asked about, did you see the news, and what do you make of the fact that Kansas voters came out so strongly in support of this constitutional referendum? And she says, no, I didn't hear anything about that. And then upon prompting her, she said, oh yeah, I did hear about that, but that's just one poll, and it doesn't mean anything. Grit your teeth on that one. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Just to give credit for the Dianne Feinstein reporting that I squeezed in before the break, that comes thanks to the work of Matt Laszlo, as he says, describes himself here, chasing lawmakers since 2006 for Vice News, Wired, NPR, Playboy, Rolling Stone, Daily Beast, etc., etc. And so, congressional reporter, and found himself before Dianne Feinstein, starts with this tweet. I haven't seen that, Senator Feinstein replies, when I ask about Kansas voters overwhelmingly endorsing abortion rights. Well, it was news that was hard to miss for somebody, serving as a current senator. But, okay, there could be a lot of things distracting her, I suppose. But then I explained what he meant. Laszlo says, gives the background of the story, and she says, oh, I did see that, Feinstein said. It didn't surprise me. Okay. Good. Fine, something slipped your mind. But then she goes on to this. She then referred to the constitutional referendum as a poll, which it isn't. And that's kind of worrying. And saying, well, it doesn't mean anything. In particular, one poll of Kansas voters, they say they support abortion rights, but we'll see when push comes to shove whether or not they really do when they're asked to vote on it. And, I will say this, it wouldn't surprise me if it caught her off guard, whether she was on top of her game in the old days or not. It wouldn't surprise me if it had caught her off guard that, well, they must be talking about just the poll, because who holds constitutional referendum, who holds a, how would we say, who actually puts that referendum to a vote in July? It was primary day in Kansas, and obviously you can't have what is clearly a general election type question on the primary ballot. Who would do that? That's just simply not done. So I wouldn't be surprised if she was surprised and confused by that. But by now, certainly, you should have been able to discern that, no, it was really a binding thing, and it's really huge news, and the victory was overwhelming, and it's kind of odd and disconcerting, and it's, makes you just, like I said, grit the teeth and then, suck in the air. That's the emoji I went with. The, geez, I What can I tell you? That's some sad news. And, unfair, disastrous news for, 40 million Californians who are represented by staff, propping her up because she won't retire. And I understand what drives her, I guess, but I mean, at some point, who cares? And it's time to go. And this is happening with increasing frequency for her. So I'm sorry to report that that's the case, but there it is. Other bits of news that I ought to include in today's roundup and share with you. Have I pocketed this or not? I want to make sure I have all these things. What other things did I open up at the beginning of the show? Here's an interesting story that Taniel tweeted around this morning. Just, local-ish story, confining itself to those of you listening from Tennessee. But if you are listening or know someone who might be in Tennessee who can do something about this story, you might be interested. This is an interesting interpretation of the story, and then some a link to the write-up in Bolts, right? Nuts and bolts of elections that Taniel helps everyone cover. A black woman wanted to vote, and you can't have that in Tennessee, and asked the state agency if she was eligible, right? You want to do that these days because, of course, we have already heard horror stories from other places in the country where a black woman who thought she was eligible to vote again, say after serving a prison sentence or finishing a parole sentence, and figuring, okay, well, now I'm done, so I ought to be eligible to vote. And then when you showed up at the polling place and gave your name and they looked and said, yep, registered voter, go ahead and vote. And you go and do that and nonetheless find yourself being prosecuted for voter fraud by some Republican attorney general or district attorney somewhere because technically you are you've been a convicted felon. You lost your voting rights permanently in that state. And even though when you went and asked at the polling place, can I vote? They said yes. Well, that was an error and too bad for you. You're going to be sentenced to 5 years in jail for quote-unquote voter fraud. So now here is a woman in Tennessee who says, well, I would like to vote, and I think that maybe my voting rights have been restored for whatever reason, after whatever reason was behind the suspension in the first place, or did I register properly? I don't know. We'll check out the details of it. But she went and asked the state agency ahead of time, before Election Day, so am I eligible to vote? And they said, yes, you are. And they committed it to writing, and she took that with her, and she went and she voted, and poof, guess what? A DA says, well, that was actually an error, and I'm going to prosecute you for voter fraud. And the DA then threw the book at her and celebrated having garnered a 6-year prison sentence for this. 60 days in jail maybe for rioting and trying to smash through into the Capitol building and stop the Electoral College vote from being counted and smearing feces on the wall. 6 years for, please, do I actually have the right to vote? Yes, you do. Okay, good. And in that case, I'm going to vote. Aha! Gotcha. That was a mistake. On our part, you're going to jail. So, as Daniel says, so wild, but also in so many ways business as usual. But guess what? Now the DA who did this is up for re-election, and you have a chance to speak to that, at least in Tennessee. According to boltsmag.org, what do they have to say about this? Daniel, who we know as Taniel, has this to add to the story. Tennessee DA faces voters just months after prosecuting activist for wanting to vote. The charges against Pamela Moses, a black woman initially sentenced to 6 years in prison for registering to vote, offered a window into the inequities of the criminal legal system in Shelby County. Wow. Why is it always a Shelby? Okay. Pamela Moses wanted to register to vote and run for office in Memphis, but she had been stripped of those rights. As a black Tennessean, she was far from alone. 1 in 5 black adults in the state are barred from voting due to a felony conviction, the result of harsh disenfranchisement laws and a wildly unequal legal system. Still, Moses believed she was eligible to have her rights restored. She sought guidance from the probation office and received written confirmation that she was indeed eligible. But Tennessee's rules for restoring voting rights are so dizzyingly complicated, like so many abortion rules these days, that even state workers get it wrong. In fact, Tennessee had banned Moses from voting for life. And after Moses followed a probation officer's bad guidance and tried to register to vote, prosecutors threw the book at her. I guess she didn't even cast a vote. She tried to register? Jeez. Shelby County DA Amy Weirich, to spell it correctly, Weirich, Weirich, I don't know, but learn the name. Amy Weirich took Moses to trial for illegally registering to vote, and then trumpeted her conviction and sentence when a Memphis judge sent Moses to prison for 6 years in January. Jeez. You can't win, right? And I mean, what a situation all by itself. You apparently commit some crime, serve your sentence for it, whether in jail or probation or whatever it is. You finish the sentence thinking, as they say, in the old days, you've paid your debt to society, so you want to reintegrate yourself into society by registering to vote as an upstanding citizen again. And then they take that, what you've done here is to say, can I please integrate myself into the system of democracy and elections that you all have designed for us to work under? And the answer is, for that, more prison. I mean, just ultimately, that's so wrong on so many levels. That doesn't even get into what this DA is doing and the mistake that led her here. But, okay, amazing. Where did we leave off with this? Shelby County DA Amy Weirich took Moses to trial for illegally registering to vote, then trumpeted her conviction and sentence when she was sentenced to 6 years in January. The case sparked an outcry after The Guardian revealed that the state had given Moses faulty guidance and had already identified its error at the time of the conviction. The judge pointed to the prosecutor's failure to disclose evidence showing that Moses had been misled to order a new trial. That's good news. And Weirich then announced that she would drop the charges. So rather than actually face up to the mistake, she tries to run away from it. But at least the charges get dropped. Nobody, including Pam Moses, should ever face criminal charges for attempting to restore their voting rights. Is this right? Tequila? Is that how she pronounces this? Tikeila. Tequila Rucker. I kind of hope that that's not the pronunciation, but it's a creative spelling at the very least. And this is an organizer with the group Memphis for All, speaking with Bolts magazine. How or why DA Weirich sent a community activist, advocate, and voting rights advocate or activist to jail for 6 years is incomprehensible. To Rucker, Moses' prosecution was an effort to suppress democracy in the county's black community. Moses is an example to the people. Don't you have the audacity to fight for change, to be the change, to step up against authority, Rucker said. That right there is the subliminal message. Don't have it. Okay, that is to say, if the question is, don't you have the audacity? The answer from the DA is, don't you have that authority, that audacity. Moses also believes that she was targeted due to her race, political beliefs, and public activism on behalf of Black Lives Matter. I think that the goal was to scare people, she told Bolts shortly after being released in March, but it could boomerang. Whether the aggressive prosecution, I hope it does, whether the aggressive prosecution of Moses boomerangs for Weirich will be tested on Thursday when voters will decide whether to keep her in office. Weirich, a Republican, faces Democratic nominee Stephen Mulroy, with the winner securing an 8-year term. Although Shelby County leans blue, Tennessee holds the general election for county offices over the summer. Guess what? Another one of those same legislative dirty tricks that Greg was telling us about earlier. Isn't that weird? This election, the general election, is in the summer. And lower turnout could scramble expectations. In addition, many residents like Moses remain barred from voting. So she still can't vote. Mulroy, who beat two other Democrats in the party's primary in early May, is a fixture in local politics, having served as the county commissioner from 2006 to 2014. Now a law professor at the University of Memphis, he's running on a platform that emphasizes criminal justice reform. Especially this part, I would think. In candidate questionnaires and media interviews, he has pledged a slate of changes to local practices, including working to reduce pretrial detention, decreasing the transfer of minors into adult court, and prosecuting fewer lower-level offenses like drug possession. These are all major issues in Shelby County, a majority black county of more than 900,000 residents. Twice the population almost of Wyoming alone, but okay. Local advocates have denounced local bail practices as discriminatory and unconstitutional, as you might well imagine, and a report released last year by a court-appointed inspector documented that people are held pretrial in the county jail for months or years. Moreover, Shelby County prosecutes far more children as adults than other counties in Tennessee, a process that is initiated at the DA's office. And nearly all the youth transferred to adult court are black. The rate was 97% in 2018 and 95% in 2019, according to the Memphis Flyer, compared to an overall county population that is 54% black. Shortly after Moses was released from prison in March, a coalition of local advocates, including members of Memphis for All and Just Audit, called for a racial equality audit of Wyrick's office. How interesting. The reality is that disparate treatment of the black community is continuing to take place and has taken place for far too long, said Rucker, who's also demanding an audit. There's more to the story, more nuts and bolts, as I'm sure you would expect from Bolts Mag. But let me jump off at this juncture and just recommend that you finish the article to see just how egregious things can be there in Shelby County, and remind you that if you are in Shelby County and eligible to vote, do show up for that. And if you know someone else who might be and you're outside the state, call them up and tell them to read this story and send them to the polls. All right, let's see. Other things to share with you. Shall I grab these while they're open? I guess so. Two things I picked up from Talking Points memo this morning, and they're charged against my 10 articles, so I might as well go and read them. An intriguing headline: why the fake electors are about a lot more than fake electors. Let's find out about that. Josh Kovensky. Oh my goodness, all of a sudden I'm now up to, I've read, how did this happen? 7 of 9 free articles this month. Those were number 1 and number 2 this morning. The TPM counter is absolute crap. Have these pages refreshed since I've had them open, and I've now that's a cheap way of doing things. But they don't have to let me see anything. But I guess I better read these things now. Geez, very costly. So, why the fake electors? It jumps right in there. To some, it seems like an odd entry point for the Justice Department to take into President Trump's attempt to overturn the results. What? I don't even know. Oh, I see what you mean. To some, it seems like an odd entry point for the Justice Department to take into President Trump's attempt to overturn the election. Why start with the fake electors? Is that what they're doing? Groups of state-level GOP officials lying about who won their state in an effort to proclaim that Trump was the real victor. It's been presented as simple: a set of state-level GOP officials, lobbyists, and fundraisers who masqueraded as the real choice of voters in states that Biden won. Of all the places to focus in the wide-ranging scheme to overturn the election, why that one? The answer may be that that's an overly narrow way to think about it. The fake electors are the entry point to Trump's various efforts to pressure state officials into throwing out Biden's win and turn the January 6th joint session of Congress into the denial and not the certification of Biden's win. It's not about the electors themselves. In reality, it's about the reason that they posed as electors in the first place: to support Trump's effort to steal the election. That's the real meaning of the fake electors. It's a story about a tool that served Trump in his bid to overturn the results of the 2020 election, one that hacked open a pathway to contest the election results even after his court challenges had failed. Take a look at what the purpose of the fake electors was. The fake electors cast their ballots on December 14th, the day that Trump campaign, lost its option to contest the election in court days after the December 8th safe harbor deadline by which states had to certify their results. Some states, like Wisconsin, for example, had outstanding court challenges from Trump's legal team. Wisconsin's Supreme Court ruled against Trump on December 14th, that same day that the state's fake and real electors voted. In the imagination of Trump world, the fake electors were, quote, preserving their votes. That is, they were simply creating certificates of their votes so that the states could, at some point on or before January 6th, discard the Biden electors' votes and choose the Trump ones. The creation of fake elector slates was the final organizing principle after the Trump campaign had been shut down on the dozens of legal challenges that it and its allies had filed. With the fake electors, however, they wouldn't need the courts. All they would need were the states and Congress. It was the final tool they had opted for after all the others failed, in pursuit of the same goal as all the others, to keep Trump in power after losing the election. Trump attorney Kenneth Chesebro argued in memos justifying the creation of the slates that there were, in fact, two deadlines for the state certification of the election results. There was a deadline by which electors had to cast their votes, December 14th, but that there was no deadline by which states had to pick which electors they were sending to Congress. The only endpoint there was the joint session on January 6th, where the people's choice was to be formalized. The fake electors then served as an entry point for much of the plotting on how to use the January 6th certification session to throw the election to Trump. Take Peter Navarro's so-called Green Bay sweep, for example. In that plan, January 6th would see repeated objections by GOP members of Congress to different state electoral votes. That would lead to free, televised press for Trump's election conspiracy allegations, giving time for state legislatures in swing states that Biden won to decertify the results. The fake pro-Trump GOP electors could then step in as the newly certified supposedly rightful electors. Alternatively, look at the planning for Vice President Mike Pence. Trump and his acolytes applied intense pressure on Pence to discard the real Biden electors and possibly replace them with fake Trump electors. Senator Ron Johnson even tried to pass a list of Wisconsin's fake slate to Pence. Pence, then, would be able to single-handedly invalidate Biden's win, either by refusing to count his votes or by subbing the fake pro-Trump slates. In that regard, the fake electors' purpose was clear: open the way to transforming January 6th from a mere formalization of Biden's win to its theft. So, why does this matter for how we see the electors themselves? The people who posed the real choice of their respective states are, by and large, officials from the local Republican establishments. They're selected before the election itself. They're selected before the election itself takes place. In a typical year, they only cast their votes once state officials have certified the election for the candidate to whom they are pledged. There's an obvious question here. Who, or what, or who made them act differently in 2020? The fake certificates that the electors used bear strong similarities to the 7 false slates that were submitted. Typically, the certificates vary widely in their language, with each state getting to decide how to submit them to Congress. That's led some investigators to suggest a high level of coordination in the slate's creation, something that may have come from above. Federal prosecutors have reportedly been investigating the fake elector scheme since autumn of 2021. Deputy Attorney General Lisa Monaco publicly confirmed the investigation in January, noting that several state attorney generals, it really should be attorneys general, had referred the matter to the DOJ. Since then, conflicting reports have emerged about what questions prosecutors have asked senior Trump administration officials about the scheme. But per the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal, at least some of their questioning of top aides to Mike Pence has gone straight to the role of the White House in the fake elector scheme. The Washington Post reported last week that prosecutors had asked about conversations with Trump, his lawyers, and others in the inner circle involved in the plot, and about the former president's efforts to pressure Pence in the run-up to January 6th. Subpoenas to potential electors who declined to participate in the scheme reflect the same. That's a good, rich vein to mine. There was a request for communications, yes, with other fake electors, but more importantly, with senior members of the Trump campaign and the Trump White House. The fake electors scheme, TPM reported last month, sets up a very straightforward potential fraud charge for prosecutors to pursue. The electors claimed, both on paper and to the federal government, that they were chosen as the chosen representatives of their states, when in fact they were not. The nature of the scheme and the DOJ's investigation suggests that it's part of a bigger fraud. That was kind of actually a weird and oblique way of approaching the issue, but okay, that seemed kind of strange. Look over here. So then I just clicked on the other one that I opened up here, which was the Christian right fires a warning shot at Senate Republicans. Something from Sarah Posner in TPM that I thought I would read, but that comes up as only number 2 of 9 free articles this month. So very odd, very unusual, to say the least, how they're counting these things. But it doesn't matter because I'm running out of time. I'm not going to be able to get through this one. And I actually would rather spend the last couple of minutes looking back on another very weird and interesting story that is developing around, I guess since we were talking about the texts falling into the hands of the plaintiff's attorneys from Alex Jones's phone, and that they may have all of the cache of deleted, or a lot of the deleted texts that might have been of some interest to the January 6th committee and to grand juries elsewhere, but that had been deleted from not only the phones of the Secret Service, although I don't know if Jones was communicating with them, and if he was, that would really be remarkable, but perhaps between Jones and some of the top political appointees in the Department of Defense, though, that could be the case, because they've deleted their texts too, and we've kind of touched on that, I think, in passing on the show, but the latest development on that needs to be noted, and noted quickly because we're running out of time. Homeland Security watchdog previously accused of misleading investigators, report says. How do you like that? Lisa Rain, Carol Leonig, and Maria Sacchetti reporting in the Washington Post. The Homeland Security watchdog, now under scrutiny for his handling of deleted Secret Service text messages from January 6th, was accused of misleading federal investigators and running afoul of ethics regulations while he was in charge of a Justice Department Inspector General field office in Tucson, according to a newly disclosed government report. So a history of effing around. Maybe he'll find out in the end. In the 2013 report from the Justice Department's Inspector General, which was never publicly released, investigators said they did not believe Joseph V. Kufari's explanation for why he failed to inform his supervisors, against federal rules, about his testimony in a lawsuit brought by a federal prisoner. Separately, they found out that Kufari broke ethics rules by referring law firms to the prisoner's family, including firms where some of his close friends worked. We concluded Kufari's actions violated the Inspector General's manual's prohibition on unethical conduct, said the report, which also noted that he may have violated guidelines by using his government email to lobby for a position as Inspector General for the Arizona National Guard, among other issues. So a long history of, somewhat isolated and weird infractions, but infractions nonetheless. For a federal agent, failing to be truthful with investigators can lead to discipline, suspension, and possible termination from federal service. An internal team recommended referring Kufari to the Inspector General's Investigations Unit for a deeper review of his actions, the report said, but he quickly retired and the following month joined the administration of then Arizona Governor Jan Brewer as a policy advisor for public safety. When he was nominated 5 years later by President Donald Trump to become the Homeland Security watchdog, Kufari told Senate lawmakers in a questionnaire that he had been fully truthful to investigators in the probe. Senators in both parties did not press him for details of the investigation before his confirmation by a voice vote in July of 2019. The new details in the report, which was obtained by the Washington Post, raise questions about how thoroughly Kufari was vetted for one of the most important oversight jobs in government, experts said, and about his suitability to lead a staff of 750 auditors and investigators with oversight of an agency with a workforce of 240,000 and a $50 billion budget. Like, what was this guy even doing in place to then be the guy who screws up the investigation and oversight of the preservation of texts and other communications where there were preservation orders made in the Secret Service? And, of course, we find the same thing now happening over at the Department of Defense as well. This guy should never have been in this job, and yet magically he was, because for some reason it was supposedly in everybody's interest to let at least some of these lower level jobs go through unopposed, when really they should have been opposing to the fullest extent possible every single nomination for service in the Trump administration from the get-go. And now, by the way, we'll be plagued with that should Trump ever, among other things, should Trump ever return to office, we'll be suffering under embedded political appointees forever, even if there is, and who knows whether there will be another election at that point. Okay, anyway, time to wrap things up and head out for the day. We, of course, have Friday left to us to revisit some of these stories, to expand on them, to share some of the other things that I will probably have no access to from TPM tomorrow. But in the meantime, Justice Putnam back on the air again, this time for his Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursday on the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, coming next.
From networksradio.com, you have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
What's up and what's on his menu today? Well, among other things, constitutional sheriffs around the country are vowing to stop the non-existent 2020 election steal. Because why? Because the FBI are acting like Nuremberg officers, which, okay, I think we get the meaning of it, but what a stupid thing to say. Stay tuned.